All right, so it looks like things are live. Hopefully you can hear me okay through this microphone. If not, say so in the little chat area. So right now, if you tuned into the last live video that we just did, today is World Tai Chi and Qigong Day. And the whole idea of this is just that around the world, 10 a.m. in each person's time zone, um, people traditionally would get together. Traditionally, it's not that old, but the typical way of celebrating World Tai Chi and Qigong Day is that people get together and they practice Tai Chi and Qigong together at 10 a.m. in their time zone. Today we did a live stream with just learning the Tai Chi 10-step form. So if you joined for that, I hope you enjoyed it. I haven't had a chance to go through the questions in that. I'll try to check them during this to see if there's anything that I need to answer from questions that came up from that video. But the whole point of this video is just you have questions about Tai Chi and Qigong, type them in, I'll take a look and provide some answers for you. So let's start with seeing if I can find, I'm not particularly good at this YouTube live thing, so let me see if I can find the questions from the previous video that we did. And we will see. Oops, that's not it. Well, it looks like that video is still processing, so I can't get to any questions that were posted there. If you do have questions, just type them in. Okay, so since there aren't any questions right now, maybe I will start with some questions that I've received commonly through YouTube. Let's see. One really common question that I get is asking about like DVDs, if I have DVDs available. I do not have DVDs available, and there are a couple reasons for that. One is that the equipment that I've had available to make videos has not been equipment that would make really good quality DVDs. So that's one reason. Another reason that I don't have any DVDs available is that I really want to make Tai Chi and Qigong information available on YouTube for free for people. So if they can't afford to buy DVDs, it's available. So right now I am contemplating making some DVDs and releasing the footage on YouTube also, so people still have access to that, but then also releasing DVDs of that information. So if people don't have good internet connection, or if they just prefer DVD, then that's available for them. So yeah, no DVDs at the moment. It is in the plans. The first DVD that I'm planning to work on is about the Tai Chi 10 form, the one that we just did in the live stream, the previous live stream. So that's if you want more details on that, stay tuned. And when that series is done, I'll start uploading it and make a DVD available. So that's the most common question that I usually get is about DVDs. Yeah. So we're just going to hang out here until I get some questions. I can talk about some random things too. No questions so far. Let's check to see if we can get to those questions from the last video again. I know this is probably not terribly exciting for you guys at the moment. My apologies. Okay. Maybe if I go this way. Yeah, I'm not the best at YouTube Live. This video that I'm doing right now is the second one that I've done with live stream. The one that we did just a little bit ago, like maybe 10, 15 minutes ago, we just finished it. That was the first one that I did with live stream. So I'm still getting used to how all of this works. No, that one's still processing. So I can't answer any questions from that one. Let's see. What are some other common questions that I get? question I just got the other day was, what is the best form of Qigong, like the most beneficial, and how can someone know uh, which form is the best for them? And that sounds like a really, like it is a really good question, but it also sounds like you're trying to get to the right thing at the beginning and start at the right spot. And my response to that is really that, first of all, what's the best form of Qigong? It's the one that you're going to do consistently. So if there's one form of Qigong that a majority of the Qigong community says is the best Qigong, but you hate it and you can't stand it, and there's another form of Qigong that you will do regularly, that's going to be a far better Qigong for you. And it's going to be a better form of Qigong than the one that maybe everyone thinks is the best for you. And the reason is because if you don't do it, it gives you no benefit. If you will do it, you'll get something out of it. So the best form of Qigong is the one that you'll do regularly. It's the one that you enjoy enough to look forward to doing at least 5 times a week. If you find that you dread doing it, it's probably not the right one for you. Another side of that is, what are you trying to get out of your Qigong practice? So there's a lot of different kinds of Qigong, and each one of those is geared toward different things. If you're really wanting to develop a really solid structure or really good root, excuse me, for your taiji practice, for martial arts, for what have you, the forms of Qigong that are really kind of the favorites in internal martial arts would be your Jianzhuang Qigong. So it's your post-standing Qigong, which is just the basic arms out in front, maintaining your structure, breathing. That's going to be your most basic go-to. So if you're doing it for like internal martial arts, or you really want to work on your structure, your stability, that's going to be your most foundational one. The one that I think everyone should be doing, that I think is probably the best, especially for people who are doing martial arts in general, but Tai Chi, would be Pangen Qigong. I have a series of that up. I'm planning to eventually redo that series so it's more detailed, but you can get started and get your practice going. It's one of the playlists that I have is for the Pangen, P-A-N-G-E-N Qigong set. So that one is the one that if you're really wanting to get solid in your structure and in your internal martial arts, that's the one I would do for sure. If you're just wanting to loosen up your joints and feel like stretch a bit and feel a little bit more awake, something that would probably be better would be like Baduan Jin. So that's the 8 pieces of Brocade Qigong. That one's great. There's a lot of big stretching movements, a lot of deep breathing, a lot of tensing and relaxing of muscles. So you get blood pumping, you get stretches, you get the deep breathing. All of that's in there. So that's a really great one to do if you're just wanting to like stretch, wake up, feel more alive. Then there's like the 5 animal frolics Qigong. That one's also great for like stretching, feeling awake, deep breathing. There's the muscle tendon changing Qigong set, and you can find lots of videos for that one on YouTube. So just look for that. Those are kind of the big ones that most people do. And yeah, so quick recap. The Qigong that's best for you is the one that you will do regularly, the one that you look forward to doing, and the one that matches your goals. So whether your goal is internal martial art training, or whether your goal is health, like stretching and deep breathing and all that, pick a Qigong that matches that, and then that resonates with you. Because again, it just doesn't make sense to try to learn a Qigong that you hate and that you won't practice because it won't do you any good. So that's a question that I've had recently. If any of you viewing have questions, feel free to type them in. Apologize about the lighting right now. Lighting situation, there we go. Basically just sitting on my couch with you guys, having a chat. So Let's see, what's another, another common question is what's the best Tai Chi form to start with? Again, it depends on what you're wanting to do with your training. Um, I think the best one to start with is probably the 10 form, the one that we just did in the previous live stream. Um, when I learned it, I didn't really appreciate it that much. I didn't teach it when I was teaching. I've gained a new appreciation for it just based on its simplicity and the fact that all the movements are symmetrical. Almost all the movements are symmetrical. So you'll notice when you do like the 24 form, which is a really common starting place, and that's where I typically started my students, which is the 24 form. Like single whip, for example. You only ever do that with the left hand coming out as the palm and the right hand as your hook hand. You don't ever see that done the other way in the 24 form or in the long form. So it's just there's a lack of symmetry. Part of the reason for that is because originally what you were supposed to do with your qigong, or not your qigong forms, with your taiji forms, is after you learn the entire form going one way, you relearn the form going the other way, and that adds the balance so that you have symmetrical training. That's almost never done. It's not something that I've taught in classes. I've told people that, and it's not really that common to do it. So what ends up happening is you just train the form the way that it's taught, going one direction, and your training is a bit asymmetrical. So the 10 form as a starting place kind of fixes that. You have a movement that you do going to one direction, you come back to center, and you repeat that movement going to the other direction. So it's a balanced form. It's not a long form. There's 10 postures, and 2 of those postures are the beginning and end posture, which pretty easy and straightforward. So it's very simple. It's easy to wrap your head around. It's just there's good repetition, one side than the other. I think it's a great starting place. Having said that, if you're really wanting to go far with your Tai Chi training, you're really wanting to understand it both in its martial application and as an art for developing yourself internally, mentally, emotionally, then the long form I think is really where you want to be spending your time. It's long enough that it gives you time to really get into kind of the zone of Tai Chi when you're practicing. One downside to a short form like the 10 form or even the 24 form. I think the 24 form is just long enough that you can, if you're not used to kind of getting into your Tai Chi zone, you can still reach it in the 24 form, and it's long enough that you can get there. The 10 form is difficult. You kind of have to do it a couple times. But the long form gives you enough time that you can really get into and stay in that taiji form for quite a while. Oh, we have, let's see, someone asked a question. I'm so excited. Thank you. I'm going to finish this thought and then I'm going to answer that question. So, yeah, it's a great form for self-development, self-cultivation, and really grasping the full kind of concept of the Tai Chi movements. And one thing that I do want to mention on that form while I'm talking about it, and before I forget to mention it, is that there's a lot of people who talk about how the long forms are just there's like a bunch of repeated moves which are unnecessary and it's longer than it has to be and you really only have to practice each thing once. And the long form is really kind of your playbook of Tai Chi. If a movement's repeated several times, that's the creators of the form's way of saying, pay attention to this movement. It's not because they got bored and they were like, oh, let's throw this one back in. It's because they're really wanting you to pay attention, practice that movement over and over during the long form, and pay attention to it because it's going to be a really foundational movement. So the repetitions in the long form are really useful for that reason. Okay, so this question. I'm 52, practicing the 108 and 10. My knees started to hurt. Any advice? So, first thing I'm going to say is I am not a doctor or healthcare professional, so no advice that I give about Tai Chi training is medical advice. From a practical perspective, there's a couple of things to think about here. One is that there's a lot of time spent with your weight on one leg or another leg, with your knee slightly bent, and there's a lot of soreness in the knees, a little bit of discomfort can be a part of the normal training process. Just like when you do weight training, you'll wake up the next morning and the day after that with super sore muscles. The difference is whether it's like, oh, I've been, using this, so I'm feeling it, versus, ow, this actually hurts, something's wrong. And so that's something that you have to pay attention to. The biggest things for protecting your knees. The first one is don't get competitive with the depth of your stance. Keep everything shallow when you're starting. Keep your knees slightly bent. Don't go super deep into stances. Protect your knees. They're not used to this. They need time to get used to it. With former students that I've had working with people, I've noticed that with some people, there's this drive to push farther than their body is ready to go. Don't do that. Your body is telling you things when you feel something's not right. And it's really important to listen to what your body is telling you. So, if you're doing something and you start to feel discomfort as you're doing your Tai Chi form, listen to your body. Either take a break and come back to it later, or change how you're doing it. Keep the stances higher, give yourself more breaks. One thing about the long form, you said you're doing the 108 form. One thing about that is it is a very long form, and you kind of have to work up to doing the whole thing without it being a little too much for your legs and knees. When I was training in China, it was just you did it, you push through it, and like that, you're doing kung fu. Like you just have to do it. If you're doing this because you want to like increase your balance, your flexibility, you want to feel better, there's no reason to push yourself like that. Really, what you want to do is treat this like any other exercise where you do your work and you give yourself rest, you let your body recuperate, then you do some more work. And the idea is you want to slowly work toward doing more work, but you don't want to go from 0 to 100, right? That's how injuries happen. So the first thing, high stance, slight bend in the knees. The second thing, make sure your knees aren't poking out past your toes. So I can't really demonstrate this right now, but when you bend your knees in the 10 form video that we just did live, I talked about how when you sink and bend your knees, you want to make sure you don't push your hips forward and let your knees poke out way past your toes. You want to sink your hips straight down and keep your knees back behind your toes. And that's true with every single stance that you do in the form. When you're going into like the forward stance, the bow step, you want to make sure that your front knee doesn't push out past the toe. Over and over, that's going to come up. So check to make sure that's not happening. Another thing is making sure your knee is pointing in the same direction as your toe. So so this is my knee, this is my foot. If I'm in a stance and they're pointing like this, that's good. If I'm in a stance and they're like this, that's bad. Because what happens here is you get a lot of stretch on the inside of your knee and a lot of compression on the outside of your knee. So we'll say this is my right leg. So this would be inside, outside. So you get this going on with your knee joint and a twist happening that your knee just isn't going to like. And so something that you have to be careful with in your Tai Chi training is here, toes pointing this way, knees pointing this way. If I'm turning my foot, I'm turning my knee, and that only happens if I'm turning at the hip. So the hip joint is where your leg turns from. You don't keep your knee and your foot and then turn like that. These go together and the rotation is happening at the hip joint. So hopefully that was helpful. Trying to think if there's any other, yeah, just make sure that you're getting enough rest too between your training sessions. I know Tai Chi is a lot of fun. I love doing it. I assume you love doing it if you're doing the 108 form. Just don't overdo it. Like, make sure that your love for it doesn't overtake your protection of your body and giving yourself adequate rest time to recuperate. I hope that helps. Again, let me reiterate, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a healthcare professional, and nothing that I'm saying should be thought of as medical advice. This is just my experience with the training that I've done and what I've learned about Tai Chi from my instructors and through my own experiences. So, yes, I hope that's helpful for you. I am sorry to hear that your knees are not feeling particularly excited right now. But yeah, cool. You are very welcome. All right, looks like we have another question. Is the 8 pieces of Brocade the best Qigong set for a beginner? Can one learn to circulate Qi without an instructor? Okay. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I am happy to reiterate. Sorry, this lighting is going kind of crazy. I don't think my computer's camera quite knows what to do with this bright window back behind me. There we go. All right. The best Qigong for a beginner is, as I said a little bit earlier, the one that beginner will do consistently. So if you do the 8 pieces of Brocade and you're like, I hate this, I don't want to do this on a regular basis, why would I keep doing this? That's not the right one for you, and that's not the right one for you to start with. Basically, if you try one and you feel that way about it, I would say give it at least a couple months. And if it grows on you and you start to change your mind about it, stick with it. If you start to enjoy it. If after those couple months you still dislike it, look for a different Qigong set. There's a lot of debate and a lot of people get really stuck on this idea of one Qigong set being the ultimate one. This exercise is better than that one, or this one's better than that one. This is the ultimate. You have to do this one. It doesn't matter how good a Qigong set is if it's not something that you're going to stick with because you don't enjoy it. So find the one that resonates with you. Find the one that you can practice and get something out of each time. So the best one for a beginner is really the one that they'll stick with. Typically, people will start with either the Zhuang, which is the post standing, or the 8 pieces of Brocade, which is the one that you just mentioned. And it really depends on what your goals are. If you're really wanting to solidify your root and your structure, then the best thing to do is start with Zhuang. That's going to be your best for internal martial arts. If you are wanting to stretch, breathe deeply, feel more vibrant and alive, then probably the Baduan Jin is going to be the best one to start with. The difference between these two is the work that's done with Zhuang is internal work. So it's internal focus. You maintain a structure, and you're really focusing on that structure and circulating your body's energy internally. There's not a lot of movement going on outside of the body. With the 8 pieces of Brocade, you are using the physical motion, all these large movements, as sort of a pump to help move the blood and the qi throughout your body through the physical movements. And it requires less, not none, but less mental focus. So it's sort of an outside working in versus the Zhuang, which is more of an inside working out. Now, the second part of your question, so the best one for a beginner, 2 things to take away from this is it's the one that you'll stick with, and it's the one that matches your goals. So I would say Zhuang if you're wanting internal martial arts goals. I would say 8 pieces of Brocade if you're just wanting to feel more flexible and more relaxed. Can one learn to circulate qi without an instructor? So this is an interesting question as far as answering it goes. I appreciate the question. The first thing to realize is you are already circulating qi. For those of you, if you don't, so let's talk about qi first, and then we'll get into answering that question. So qi is this concept of a life force or energy that exists in living things that keeps them functioning. That concept comes out of observations that were made through centuries in China of people looking at how the world worked and coming up with an explanation that tied together what they were observing. What they called that is qi. Exactly what qi is something that's up to debate. Some people say, oh, it's a electromagnetic field caused by the circulating charges in your body. There's a lot of charged particles in your body that are moving either in your blood flow or nervous system, muscles, you name it. There is current happening. Um, is chi the electromagnetic field created by that current? Maybe. Some people say that chi is um, like your ATP. So it's the energy from the cells, from the mitochondria in the cells of your body. And as you do these exercises, you increase the amount of ATP that your body can produce, which is, I suppose, similar to any other exercise. And that gives you the benefits of chi, and that's chi. Maybe. Some people say that it's actually like vibration. So it's more closely related to sound than it is related to like an electrical current or magnetic field. Maybe. What I think is interesting is that all of these concepts of chi that people say this is chi, that's chi, all have an aspect that's described by the traditional expression of chi. So like, um, for example, if you're doing qigong, sometimes you'll notice that you start, like a part of you will start shaking, especially when you're starting qigong, and that will eventually smooth out. So that's like the vibration. Sometimes when you're doing hand motion like this, when you're doing qigong, you start to feel almost like a magnetic pull between the hands. You're like, see, that's the magnetic part of it. It's obviously a magnetic field. Each of these ideas of what chi is ties into the experience of chi, but no single one perfectly describes what is traditionally thought of as chi. So, what is chi? My perspective is that there's a couple of different things that it can be. One is that it's its own like standalone energy that is sort of the way that it's kind of thought of traditionally, and we just don't have a way to measure it scientifically yet. So it's its own thing. Another perspective of chi, the one that I kind of hold to, is that it is a concise way of describing a larger amount of things interacting in a complex way. So I could say, like one thought process is like chi follows the blood. Um, so there's that concept of maybe, that's playing into the charge present in blood flow, creating electromagnetic field. That's one aspect of it. So maybe that's a part of it. So we say, okay, so chi is partly what we experience from the movement of charged particles through our body. It's partly what we experience through the production of increased ATP, or it's partly electromagnetic field. It's a complex system that works together. And instead of saying, well, now you want to focus on this flowing through your body, electromagnetic field, vibration, blah, 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 blah. We say chi, and that encapsulates all this complex system of things working together, both things that we know about and things that we haven't yet discovered. And so it's a quick way of summarizing a very complex system. And that's why I don't think any specific description of chi is necessarily accurate. And that's why the more vague concept of it being energy flowing through the body or through the weather patterns or through living things, what have you, is a little bit better. Even though it's vaguer, it's a little bit better of a description than the really specific things that people try to come up with, although those are important because each one of those kind of steers us toward a better understanding of what is actually contained in this concept of chi. So that was a huge aside. So chi, we will just call it for really, for being concise, we'll just call it energy. So it's energy in your body, however you want to think of that. Can you learn to circulate that without an instructor? Again, like I said before, you're already doing that. Each of us is already doing that. The planet's doing that. You can tell in the weather patterns that energy is a part of what's going on up there. So you can think of that as thermal energy from the sun interacting with our atmosphere, moisture in the air, clouds holding that in, you name it. That's all a type of energy. That's all a type of chi affecting what we're seeing in the clouds. and clouds, the weather systems. In the body, same kind of idea. All of this is already happening. I think what you're getting at is, can you learn to direct it specifically without an instructor? I think the best thing for anyone who's wanting to go deep into that type of work, trying to fix the lighting here, is to start with an instructor. So someone had to be the first person to try to do this, right? And they did not have an instructor beyond what they were observing. So it can be done, but do you want to start from scratch and try to learn all the things that have been learned over the past hundreds of years, thousands of years, that people have been actively working on circulating, specifically directing the energy in their body? Or do you want to start with learning all of that knowledge condensed for you and then build on top of it? Can you learn to do it by yourself? Yes. Is it going to be the most efficient, effective way of learning? No. However, if you're really honest with yourself and you really take a lot of time to make sure that what you're doing is effective for you, you will learn better than if you learn from an instructor who doesn't really know what they're doing. And that's the tricky thing, is you need to make sure you find a really good instructor who knows their stuff. And I think you'll go further, learn more, and learn deeper with an instructor than you would on your own. After you learn the basics and you have basically reached a level where you can work on your own, then of course you can work on your own. So I guess it's both. All of that to say, yes and no. It really depends on how sensitive you are, how much you pay attention to what's going on inside you. Yeah, so you can. Someone did it before. That's how Qigong started. That's how energy work started. Someone was the first person. So you can be the first person learning it on your own. You have the advantage of having like videos and books that have been published ad nauseum all over. Like you just type in Qigong in Google or Amazon, you're going to get lots of resources. So, I mean, you're not starting completely from scratch if you're trying to learn on your own. But ideally, find a good instructor, and that'll take you a lot farther. And then when you move to your own working solo practice, it's going to take you a lot farther. So hopefully that answered your questions. I know that was a very long-winded way of answering those questions, but in the interest of being thorough, I hope that answered for you. Let's see, we have another question. Can you please explain yin-yang moves, breathing patterns? Okay, so for those who are not, you are very welcome. Let's see, explain yin-yang moves and breathing patterns. Let's start first with yin and yang. So this concept may be new to some people, so we'll start there. I feel like I'm giving you a better view of my neighbor's house than I am of me, and I'm not sure if they appreciate that, so let me scoot this. Maybe that will be better. Yin and yang. So these are concepts of opposites that support one another. So things that are yin, sort of the traditional description of yin, is the shadowy side of the hill, or the side of the hill that the sun's not shining on. So it's darker, it's cooler. Typically yin is like a more receptive, more yielding. Yang, on the other hand, is like the side of the hill that the sun is shining on. So it's bright, it's warm, there's like, it's more vibrant. There's this sort of outward, like strong pushing out, whereas yin is more inward, yielding, pulling in. So those are kind of the concepts, and both of those balance each other. And in Tai Chi, you start with this concept of wuji, which is a lack of differentiation between those two. So it's kind of like this is yin, this is yang. And wuji, you can't tell which one's which. They're just all stuck together. Taiji, the grand ultimate is what separates those. So now you can tell what's yin and you can tell what's yang. And you maintain balance with those two. And so what's considered, we'll start with the breathing. What's considered yin breathing would be like inhaling. What's considered yang breathing would be exhaling. Now you can have more yang dominant breathing with inhale and exhale if it's more forceful and vigorous. You can have more yin dominant breathing with both exhale and inhale if it's relaxed and smoother. So typically, though, in just the most basic thought process, exhale is yang, inhale is yin. Combining that with movements, there's a couple of different ways to think about it. One is that when you do the transition between movements, that's when you inhale, that's your yin portion of the movement. And when you express the movement, so like in the 10 form that we just did, you do a transition movement where you grab the ball before you go into parting the horse's mane, right? Your transition, that's your inhale. You're parting the horse's mane, that's your exhale. Nope, showing you the neighbor's house again. So that's one way of thinking about it. Another way of thinking about it is that you have yin movements and yang movements. So sometimes this overlaps with the previous thought of like transitions are yin, movements are yang, and sometimes it doesn't overlap with that. So let's see, an example would be rollback. So when you're doing grasping the sparrow's tail, you start with pung and then you roll back. Well, roll back is predominantly a yin movement, and it's a yielding movement with redirection. So that a lot of times is thought of as an inhale as you do that movement. So you exhale on pung, inhale on lu, roll back. Something that I learned while I was in China that I've always held to, and this again depends on why you're wanting to learn and practice Tai Chi and Qigong, is if you stick to those breathing patterns. Let me preface this a little bit. If you're doing this for health and all you're planning to do are the movements of the forms, sticking to those breathing patterns are a great way to calm your mind, get yourself very focused on the form, being centered, and it's a great meditation practice. It's excellent for that. It's also excellent for bringing yourself into center so that you can kind of not be as distracted, whether you're doing it for health or martial purposes. It helps you not be as distracted by things that might be racing through your head. If you're doing it for martial arts practice, something that I learned while I was training in China, and that's always stuck with me, is if you stick to those breathing patterns, you're going to be puffing like a forge billows, trying to do these movements in application through the whole, and you're going to hyperventilate and try to get through, the applications of these movements. There are times when you want to time your breathing to match exactly what you're doing. But honestly, if you're doing the form, a very relaxed, regulated pattern of breathing that's consistent is going to be better for you than sticking to this move is an inhale, this move is an exhale. This is a yin movement, so I inhale. This is a yang movement, so I exhale. So both ideas are good. But if you are wanting to do the martial application side of Tai Chi, then those breathing patterns, it's better to have a consistent breathe in, breathe out that doesn't necessarily match what you're doing with your body, so that you learn to keep constant oxygen flow coming in regardless of where your body is. That's how you would more naturally breathe in a sparring situation anyway. You keep breathing, and you might exhale when you throw a punch or when you do a throw, whatever. You can keep that, but at the same time, consistent breathing is probably better. So that's breathing patterns. And I think we covered movements a little bit. Basically, any movement that would be considered a yin movement would be a movement that is yielding to the opponent's force, drawing in, or retreating. A movement that is considered yang is any forceful outward movement. In Tai Chi, we try to stay away from rigid muscular force, and we use like fudging force, which depends on muscular force, but a intelligent use of muscular force and body structure to execute a movement with minimal tension, minimal wasted force. And that would be those outward expressions. Those are your yang movements, forward, more powerful movements. So I hope that answered your question adequately. Again, long-winded, but there you go. Yin's yielding, yang is expressive. And another quick note on yin and yang. Some people think of yin as the abs. So let's start back a little further. Western mindset is, we'll take temperature for example, since that's something that's used to demonstrate. I apologize about the lighting today. Ooh. Maybe I'll do this. Do some side lighting there. See if that takes care of the issue. So, okay, Western perspective, scientific thinking, warmth. Cold is the absence of heat. Heat is not the absence of cold. So the thing is, do you have thermal energy there? If you do, you have heat. If you don't, you have cold. So cold is the absence of heat. In yin and yang, it doesn't work like that. Yin is its own energy. It has its own characteristics and its own ability to fill space. And yang is its own energy and has its own characteristics and its own ability to fill space. And their interplay is what provides different yang characteristics or yin characteristics being expressed based on which energy is stronger in that expressed movement, breathing pattern, weather pattern, what have you. So yes. Okay, I'm going to go on to another question. I hope that answered your question adequately. Let's see. I have a question. What is the normal salute between a senior and a beginner? Okay, so the normal salute. This depends a lot on the style, the instructor, the tradition in that style with that instructor and their lineage. So the proper salute is vastly different depending on where you're studying, who you're studying under, and what style they're teaching you. A normal salute, so like the most standard salute, I have a video that explains this, but it's a right fist, a left palm. You tuck the thumb of the left palm, and it's going to go between the index finger and middle finger knuckle here, and you push forward. So it's this kind of a thing, okay? And there's variations of that where you grab and you bow. There's variations of that where you do like a circling motion. There's in Shaolin traditions, sometimes they'll do this, and then sometimes they'll do this, where it's just one hand and they bow. There's much more elaborate ways of doing this, and so it really depends on who you're training with and what they are teaching you as the correct salute to do with them. And so the important thing is not to get stuck on which one is maybe more standard, but which one are you being taught. Use that one with your instructor to show respect for them. And so yeah, it's less about what's the most standard. If you go to competitions, if you're performing, then your standard salute is going to be this when you are starting your form, and you keep yourself straight, you don't bow, keep yourself straight, and you push out from the chest when you do that. And that's like a very professional way of doing the salute and presenting yourself to the judges and the audience. But in your training environment, it depends on your instructor. So again, I tend to give long-winded answers. I hope you don't mind. So yes, there's the answer to your question. I hope that was adequate for you. Could you explain how syncing in Tai Chi works? Thank you. Okay, so we went into this a little bit in the previous live video. And it's a little difficult to do without demonstrating, but I'll talk about it. So syncing in Tai Chi. first of all, there's the mental component where um, we're taught to stand pushing out the chest, sucking the belly, keeping the back straight. And that pulls a lot of tension up into the chest. That restricts the movement of the chest when you breathe, when you move your body, and that makes you more top heavy. It's like you pulled all of your energy up here, and if you're going to get pushed against, it's going to be easily toppled over. So the first thing is you take that, you sink the chest and relax it, and you let that just drop down into your lower belly. And what you should feel like is your upper body is, you know, those like blow up punching dolls. I don't know if you played with those as a kid or not. I had those occasionally. And they have like a sandbag in the bottom and the top of it's inflated, and you hit it and it knocks over and comes back up. So the way that we like to carry ourselves with our energy up here in our chest is like taking that doll and turning it on its head. It's really easy to knock over. Dropping it down into your lower belly is like setting that doll correctly. So it can be pushed, but it's not the best example because those will flop over, and you don't want to be floppy when you're doing Tai Chi. But that will bring you down so that you are better balanced and have a better structure. So that's the first thought of sinking in Tai Chi practice. And it's really less complicated. It's an interesting exercise to try to do, taking that energy and dropping it to your lower belly. But it's easy to kind of overdo it and get too focused on that. It's just a matter of relax and let it drop to the lower belly. Sink that energy down to the lower belly. At the same time, though, you have this whole, like we talked about, yin-yang concept. You have these opposites that are interplaying. So you have an energy traveling up like the spine to the crown of the head that's elongating and pushing up, giving your spine structure. At the same time, you have this energy going down through the low back sacrum, through the hips, down into the legs. And that's your downward force. So you have like this opposing up and down going on. And this moves out from your center. So that's the source of your motion. And extends up and extends down. The important thing is not to be so extended up that, again, you draw your energy up and become top heavy, but you also don't want to be so extended down that your top collapses and you don't have the structure that you need up top. So sinking is something that you really need balance in as well. If you sink too much, you can draw yourself in and down, and that's not beneficial. You can also not do enough sinking, then you're top heavy and you can get knocked over easily or lose your balance easily. So part of the sinking with dropping to the lower belly, if you look at an image of the spine going all the way down to the sacrum. So the sacrum is like this wedge that sits between your hip bones. Your hip bones come in like this. They look like big elephant ears. You have this wedge shape, and the sacrum wedges down into that. And that's what connects your spine to your hips and lower body. That's kind of like that's your connector. That's where the top connects to the bottom. If you think of your motions, so if you can pull up an image of a sacrum or a spine with the sacrum, the frontmost or the most anterior top part of the sacrum is sort of mechanically what I would think of as your center of movement dantian. Now, I know your dantian is like your energy field, and there's variations on belief of where it's exactly situated. As far as your center of movement, that's probably going to be your best place to focus, because mechanically it connects your base and your upper body so that your alignment is structurally sound. And it also corresponds well to the location of the lower dantian. Yeah. So when you sink and you bring your weight down, part of the sinking is bringing your focus of balance, your focus of energy, your focus of movement to that anterior superior part of your sacrum. From there, that's where movements come out of for your body. But to further this sinking concept, imagine that that sacrum has a cord wrapped around it. So it's wrapped up tight and dropping straight down like a plumb line attached to the center of the earth, and that draws you down onto your base. That's another excellent way to get your root and your structure for sinking in Tai Chi. So I'm not sure if that completely answered your question. You want to make sure that as you're sinking, you're sending that force down your legs to the correct portions of your feet. There's a lot of debate about where that correct portion is. What I have found works best, what I've learned from various instructors, is that when you bring that force down where the force drives into the ground, I wish I had a model of like a foot with the tibia going on to the talus, but I don't. So we'll say this is my foot, this is my heel, arch, ball of the foot, toes. The tibia comes down and sits right there. So it's not completely back over the heel, but it's not completely out over the arch. It's like right, kind of just barely in front of the heel, right? That's where you direct your force, straight down here. So if this is my heel, you sink through here, force-wise. That's where your weight's directed. If your weight comes back here, you'll notice your toes do this, and you'll start to lose structure back this way. If your weight shifts up here to the ball of the foot, you'll notice that you're gripping the floor and your heel's coming, there's not much weight on your heel, and your weight is shifting forward. That makes you unstable going forward. So you have a tendency to fall forward more. So the force comes down right here in front of the heel. Your Yongchuan point is, if we're talking about qi circulation, that's where your energy flows in here, but your force, mechanical force, is here. And your toes can slightly grip the ground to keep this area more hollow. So when you have that sinking, so it drops down to the lower belly or anterior superior part of the sacrum, that's wrapped around, has that plumb line pulling straight down to the center of the earth, drawing you down for your stability. That force is translated down through your legs, through your hips, down to that part of the heels. And that's where you sink sort of straight toward the center of the earth, because there's not really another direction to sink on this planet. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Looks like we have been going for about 53 minutes, so I'll keep going for another 7 minutes or so, and then we'll call it good. I appreciate you guys asking questions. This has been fun. Happy World Tai Chi and Qigong Day to everyone. I hope you guys had a chance to practice today, or will have some sort of celebration for World Tai Chi and Qigong Day. Thank you. How does this sinking relate to the qua in movement? So the important thing to remember about like the inguinal crease a lot of times is referred to as a qua. You want to make sure that you aren't pushing. So here's one leg, here's the other leg. This is the front of your hips, this is the back. You don't want to rotate your legs and push your hips so that they open out. I'm not sure if I'm describing this well. Basically what that does is it restricts the ability of your hips to move. It tends to push your knees out over your toes, and it locks your hips in place. And the downside to that is, especially if you're doing push hands, any place where you are locked up is a place that's leverage for your opponent. So besides not feeling great to have your hips locked out, it limits your ability to adjust what you're doing. so it puts you in a double weighted state. It limits your ability to maintain good balance, puts your knees at risk. All that is not good. So you can imagine all this sinking down and alignment, drawing down toward the center of the earth, have your hips locked out and rotated forward. It's going to be bad news as far as being able to utilize that sinking that you've done. If you let your hips fold in a little bit, and it's not collapsing, but it's allowing a crease, that inguinal crease, to crease. You're kind of sinking in and down a little bit. That allows that translation of structure sinking to be useful and be changeable. So you can maintain your balance better, you can handle incoming force better, and you can generate force better. So the really important thing to remember with the qua is do not lock it out. Keep it changeable, keep it relaxed, keep it flexible, keep it well structured. Those are the things that you really want from your qua. I keep saying qua. That's kind of a geek speak term for the inguinal crease, the hip joints, that region of the body. If you keep that relaxed, allow there to be that crease and sink, then you're going to be able to utilize the sinking that you've done with all the stuff that we talked about before, rather than just having this sensation of brooding and not being able to translate that into practical use, whether that's maintaining better balance or moving more easily or improving your push hands practice. So hopefully that answered your question. I know you can get a lot more detailed into it, but I think that should hopefully be a good answer to what you were asking there. Thank you, great explanation. Wishing you a wonderful day. Thank you so much. I wish you a wonderful day too. I'm glad the explanations were useful for you. Okay, I currently have a knee injury, not related to Tai Chi. Can one perform the forms, drills, Qigong, etc. while seated so long as the spine is straight? Okay, yeah. So yeah, seated Tai Chi is really common, actually. You can find, let's see, who is it? I think it's Dr. Paul Lam has a channel, and he has really high quality, well-produced videos for a lot of Tai Chi instruction, and I would highly encourage you to check out his channel. And if I remember correctly, he has videos available for seated Tai Chi and Qigong. And so you can definitely practice Tai Chi, get benefits, meditation benefits, movement benefits, and basic structural movement benefits from it in a seated posture. Absolutely. There's a different interplay between your lower body and your upper body, though, because there's a lack of engagement of the lower body. And Tai Chi works whole system, right? So top to bottom. If you're doing it seated, your system somewhat for your structure stops at your ischial tuberosities, your sit bones, where you're contacting the chair. You have some grip and movement, some interplay with your feet in the ground coming up your legs, but the majority of your structure is resting on that chair. So your whole system interplay is going to be from the chair out as far as movement goes. So that changes things. It can be done and it can be beneficial. And it's a great starting place if, again, not a doctor, not a healthcare professional, this is not medical advice. If you have something that's preventing you from doing it standing, seated is a great idea. If you're really wanting to dig into a lot of the, it's a different thing, but here's the thing with Tai Chi. You're learning to operate with efficient movement. you're learning to operate with how is your body structured in comparison and in relation to other things, especially if you're doing push hands, but if you're doing solo form as well. And so you'll be learning a slightly different way of communicating that interplay between your body and the forces acting on it, because your base is the chair, basically. Your ischial tuberosity is sitting on that chair. But it's going to be beneficial because you're going to learn about your structure and your movement through that base of a chair. It's going to be different from how it's going to be when you're standing, but it's not going to be not beneficial to have a different way of relating to that structure. So yes, try it in a chair and rock it in a chair. And when you can, move to standing and know it's going to feel different. Know that the interplay between the upper half and the lower half is going to be different. You're going to have to work on your alignment in a way that works with your hips differently and your legs differently and your feet differently than when you're seated. But Tai Chi is all about learning to work with change. It's not a static art. And so whether that's change from seated to standing or change from solo to partner drills, it's all about change. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Yes, maintain your correct structure while you're doing it seated. And yes, you can definitely do it that way. If you're looking for good videos, check out Dr. Coleman. So we have gone over the hour by almost 2 minutes. I am going to call it quits here. If you have further questions that you post, I will take time when I can access them to try to post some responses, or maybe I'll save them for a future Q&A video. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I hope you took something out of it. I hope this has enlightened you to some extent, or at least just been entertaining. And I wish you all both a wonderful World Tai Chi and Qigong Day, and I wish you all the best in your training. Thank you guys and gals and everyone in between. Take care and have a wonderful day.